If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Politically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Chris McDaniel, a political reporter with St. Louis Public Radio. Joining me, as always,
Jason Rosenbaum of the St. Louis Beacon.
Joe Mannis of the St. Louis Beacon.
Let's get right down to it. It seems that the mayoral race is heating up.
Oh,
so hot.
It's
so hot.
The issues are critical to
Very
life
substantive.
or death.
Very substantive.
Right,
Well,
Joe?
Jason's being a little sarcastic here. But
Heating up to, compared to weeks past,
Yes.
at least.
what's interesting is that here it is, less than 2 months before the primary, and the candidates are basically sparring. Now, this is traditional over when and where to debate. Reed's claiming that the joint appearances that they've scheduled so far together, the mayor's office notes there's about a dozen. They're saying that they're too small of venues, that they need something bigger. I think they're implying they're hoping some sort of TV or radio thing.
Right.
And so they want something bigger, better. And that's traditional to be fighting about that, but they're also fighting over Reed's wife, who's a judge, who stepped down as a judge, and his campaign saying she did so because the Slay administration cut her hours back, and they think it's linked to the campaign. And the mayor's campaign says that's ridiculous. They've been sparring over various endorsements. The big thing is that the mayor got the St. Louis Labor Council this week. That's a big one.
Mm-hmm. Which is incongruous with the endorsements that Reed has gotten from the firefighters unions.
Correct. Now, the firefighters are right. Right now, they're the only major union that is endorsing Reed. And, of course, this is in connection with the mayor and the firefighters been at odds for a couple of years now over their pension plan and trying to change their pension plan.
And that seems to be one of the main issues where the two diverge on things. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, and I think yes, but also like the Reed has been claiming that the mayor isn't focusing enough on crime fighting in the city, and the mayor says
he released
yes, we
an
are.
ad about it. In fact,
Yeah, and the mayor says yes, we are. But the stuff that they're doing ad wise is really just online right now. Neither
Yes,
side
for
is
both
on
of them.
TV.
Yeah.
It's just videos. I refer to them as test ads.
Yeah.
They want to see what plays
They're
well
the right
online
link.
and
The
what
thing
hasn't.
The thing that struck me most about the Slay ad, and this might be myopic of me because I regularly go to county council meeting, but Charlie Dooley, the St. Louis County executive, was very prominent in that ad. And I think
Yes.
I asked this at a previous podcast, like, how does that benefit Slay to have the leader of an entity that's not ruling over the city in his ads? I mean, if you took it in reverse, if Slay appeared in ads for Dooley in 2014 when possibly he's getting primaried, I mean, is that really going to help Dooley at all?
Well, they think it helps with swing voters, and this goes back 20 years.
Yeah.
Mayors often try to feature the St. Louis County executive in their ads or whatever to show that they have a regional focus, that they're a power player, and that they, keying on Jason's recent series, and that they have some influence. So
Right.
that's one of the things they do. Now, there's also a side benefit in the case of Dooley, which I'm sure the mayor's campaign will deny, but there is the visual. Dooley is the region's top elected African-American outside of Congressman Lacy Clay, who's in Washington. So having Dooley in the ad also is a subliminal effort by the mayor's campaign, in my opinion, to show African-American voters that the mayor is on good terms with the establishment in the African-American elected officials. And the same way with him having the endorsement of Jamila Nasheed, the new state senator. And that's the type of thing that Slay needs to have.
And Lacy Clay.
Yeah, and Lacy Clay. He needs to have that message out because, of course, he's been at odds with various officials in the past over such things as the ouster of then the first African-American police chief, fire chief a few years ago, different things like that.
But I think there's been a question brought up, especially by people who are allied to Reed, that having these endorsements, are they really going to help Slay in some of the North Side wards or some of the South Side wards, which are majority African American? Like, just because Jamil Nasheed endorses Slay, does that mean he's going to get more votes because of that?
Well, I think what they're hoping is to at least, good question, but to at least cut down on the margin.
Yeah, and that's by no means denigrating Jamila Nasheed.
Right.
I know has a really solid reputation of being a fierce and at times effective campaigner, but I mean, how is that going to translate into helping? Maybe it translates by the fact that since they're not supporting Reed, he's not getting that organizational help or something like that.
Exactly. In fact, you just brought up the biggest thing. If Lacy Clay has endorsed the mayor, that means that Lacy Clay's operation, which turned out to be fairly formidable in August, will not be working for Louis Reed.
Yeah.
Won't be doing any get out of the vote. Well, it's hard to talk about this race without talking about fundraising. Slay released his campaign finance reports, which are optional this week, mandatory next week.
Yes.
He has $1.5 million in cash on hand, which is the same, roughly the same that he had in cash on hand in the last campaign filings.
Right.
His largest donor was Missourians for Excellence in Government, which is a Rex Singfield organized PAC.
Yeah, and interestingly, both candidates have gotten big donations from Rex Singfield in the past, though Slay has gotten more than Reed.
But Slay's biggest donor overall, if you don't include just this report, but look at all the major donations he's gotten since the beginning of 2012, his biggest donor is Sam Fox.
Yeah.
He's given him $45,000. It's in smaller donations, but it totals that.
Yeah,
It totals $45,000. The Rex Singfield money is actually $50,000.
Right.
Though.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And then Reed's money, his largest donor comes from a couple different firefighters unions, but I think it's about $40,000 right now.
Yeah. Now Reed has not put out his report this week. We don't know if he will.
Right.
Again, it's optional. But his last report that he did release, which was almost a month ago, he only had about 10% of what the mayor had in the bank.
Yeah, and I think what Reed has been saying is, I mean, for him, he has to hope that it's a repeat of what happened in the summer of 2012, where a lot of candidates who were outspent by people like Tashara Jones, for example, or Michael Butler in a state house race, they were able to win because of high African-American turnout or just high supporters of Lacy Clay, because there's obviously people who probably voted for Lacy Clay who are of all nationalities because he won by such a large margin. But, I mean, he has to hope that something like that happens, to go over this financial deficit that even I think he admits he's just not going to be able to bridge the gap with Slay. I mean, I think at this early in the game, unless somebody gives him $1 million or $2 million donation, it's just not going to happen at this point. Would you kind of say that?
No, I would agree with you. And I think there's the other issue is that in a March 5th primary, your turnout is going to be low.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So unless either one or both of them can generate enough excitement to get beyond their core supporters, then it becomes who is most successful at getting his core supporters out. If it means that a lot of the fringe people don't bother to go to the polls. I mean, there have been at times over the last 20, 30, 40 years when the city's March primary has had a large turnout. I'm not sure that this is shaping up to be one of them. It's early, but I'm not sure if it's generating the type of controversy than, say, 1997 when then Mayor Clarence Harmon was battling with
Freeman Bosley.
Well, actually, 97, Freeman Bosley was mayor, and Clarence Harmon ousted him, but it was a very intense Democratic primary.
Yeah.
Or in 2001 when it was Bosley, Harmon, and Slay.
Yeah.
So far, it hasn't solicited that much excitement. But you know what is getting a lot of excitement?
What?
The inauguration, Jason. You were there for it.
No, I wasn't. I was actually very warm inside my house watching people tweet about it.
Joe,
she was
the one. There. The old lady was there with my earmuffs.
Was it exciting?
Well, it was like 20 degrees out, and I've been at colder ones, but it was extremely and a lot of people's computers were freezing because we were outside a little tables.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was very cold, and but Jay Nixon, the governor, promised that he would give a short speech. It was still about 20 minutes. I'm not sure if it was that much shorter than most speeches, but he generally focused on broad themes, not individual issues. Basically talked about the need to come together, work across the aisle, the stuff he's been saying for the last 4 years. One of the intriguing parts was he was talking about how progress isn't partisan and all this, and then immediately, within minutes after his speech was over, Republican leaders in the State House and Senate were putting out statements, and basically they were saying that as far as they were concerned, they didn't buy any of his speech. They thought, we had one state senator refer to it on Twitter as a know-nothing speech from a do-nothing governor.
It was John Lamping said, who I believe listens to this podcast, it was a do-nothing speech from a do-nothing governor.
Yes.
And if I'm wrong, John Lamping, please hit me up on Twitter and make sure you correct me.
And Tim Jones, the speaker, was saying that he liked the words, but he hadn't seen much evidence of performance. The reaction was interesting because I cannot recall that swift of responses in the negative so soon after a gubernatorial speech. Now, some of it's the nature of social media and the way things get around now, but it also highlights the divisions, the partisanship that's going on in the state capitol, just as it is in Washington, and which can make it difficult to reach compromise on certain issues, such as the Medicaid expansion, which the governor and many groups in the Hospital Association and others are pressing, and which the Republican leaders, as we've said numerous times here, are not inclined to even discuss.
Yeah, and I seem to recall in 2009, that was the time when Ron Richard and Charlie Shields were in charge of the House and the Senate, respectively. Right. And I do recall that both of them had a relatively good relationship with the governor. I don't know what the relationship is like between House Speaker Tim Jones and Senate President Pro Tem Tom Dempsey and Nixon. I think that that'll probably play itself out over the next couple of years, and in Dempsey's case, maybe over the next 4 years. So
now, Dempsey did perform the ceremonial role of being the MC at the inauguration, and everything seemed to be pretty amiable on the stage. The one funny thing was they have to wait. According to the Constitution, the governor is to be sworn in at noon, so everybody else is sworn in before. And then the governor is sworn in at noon and then gives his or her speech. Well, they all wait for the bell from the Catholic Church that's just across the street. Well, so they're waiting for the bells to chime, and so the ceremonial bells are chiming. Everybody's really quiet, and people didn't notice for a second that only 8 bells had been risen. There was this long pause of maybe a minute, and then somebody started chuckling, and then all of a sudden, I think some people thought, we'd miscounted. So then the governor was getting ready to actually launch into his address. And then all of a sudden it started ringing again. And everyone sort of chuckled. And then they did do the swearing in and he proceeded. But it was just one of those human moments that one of the refreshing things about the inauguration in Missouri is that it's open to the public.
Yes.
It's out there no matter how cold or rainy or whatever it is. Anybody can come. You may have to stand, but you can be there. And then there's the parade beforehand, and because it was so cold, there weren't that many people on the parade route.
I saw pictures. It seemed to be a lot of legislators and Nixon just in the back
just remember,
of
in 2009, it was inaugurating a lot of new people. In fact, I think
there was a pretty good crowd then.
Yeah,
along those
and
streets.
I believe Kinder was the only returning statewide office holder that year?
In 2009, yes.
And Robin Carnahan as well.
Right, correct.
So I think that was probably why there was more interest in that, because it was a new governor, there was a new attorney general, a new treasurer. This time around, the only new person is Jason Kander, and while he did make the bold step of changing the website, not only with his picture, but also the color tone from yellow to blue. He did other things, too. He had a day one announcement about not taking lobbyist gifts for his staff and working on things for early voting and
he had
other stuff.
Really nice little miniature cupcakes on trays outside his office.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about this new Secretary of State website,
when I saw Robin Carnahan in this studio, I did remark to her that it was very jarring to go to that website and not see her face, because ever since I started becoming reporting on Missouri politics. We all go to that site every day. And just to see somebody else's picture on it is kind of weird.
It's not like she was FDR. Who was
it's less of her and more of just the color scheme. The blue, it's jarring.
I mean, I've only been, following Missouri politics, since, 2004.
Well, you wouldn't know it because you have a wealth of knowledge that belies your youth.
Back then, I was all about Illinois politics when Republicans still controlled the governorship there. So that's real ancient history.
And the governor had a meeting like right after the inaugural, which also surprised me, with teachers and other groups to highlight his focus on education. And so it was. But it is so different from what you see in Washington, where it's all the security. I mean, there's plenty of security in Jeff City, but it's just more open. It has a small town feel to it.
It is a small town. It's very quaint.
Yeah, and the same way with the ball, where people can show up and watch from the balcony. And try doing that in D.C. It won't happen. Trust me.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on inside of the Capitol building. It seems like there's been a little bit of progress on a bill that would change the way that the lieutenant governor would
Not just
be
lieutenant
succeeded.
governor. No,
well, and
all statewide offices.
This is another Republican attempt to
I will say,
curb
though,
the governor's power.
there have been different types of these bills put forward by House Speaker Pro Tem Jason Smith of Salem, who ironically is running for the 8th District race. And this is
Congressional race, right?
Yeah. And this is being done because there's fear that Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder is going to get the nomination and there's a vacancy. You can go back on our podcast. We've talked about it for hours at this point. And the thing that kind of struck me about it was this bill actually wouldn't be that detrimental to Democrats if it ended up passing, because under this bill, Governor Nixon would be able to appoint a placeholder that would serve out the 1 or 2 years of the term. The caveat is that person could not run in the subsequent special election. So that would mean there would have been no Becky Cook, who would have won immediately after she was appointed, or Margaret Kelly immediately after she was appointed. That would be the main consequence. But under that scenario, if Kinder ended up getting the nomination and won Congress, Nixon would get to appoint a Democrat almost certainly. Now, that might change on who he actually picks. We talked about on this show, for example, that maybe he would pick someone like Koster or Zweifel to position them for the next election. Well, in this case, that might not be the best option, because then that person would be frozen from running for that special election. So maybe he would pick somebody from his staff, like former House Minority Leader Jeff Harris of Columbia. Maybe he would pick a state senator from the Democratic Party, like maybe Jolie Justice of Kansas City, or a former one like Victor Callahan of Independence. Maybe he would pick a Democratic businessman. I mean, you can name thousands of them, I guess, hypothetically. Or maybe he would go outside the box and pick a Republican that he really likes, like Charlie Shields or something, just to make all the conservatives batty or something. I mean, all of that's hypothetical, but under that it would give more leverage to the governor on, him being able to appoint, although it would kind of change who he could particularly appoint.
because frankly, the gubernatorial appointments of the vacant statewide offices has been used traditionally. Like you mentioned, Margaret Kelly. She was the first woman to serve in statewide office because Kit Bond appointed her.
Yeah.
I mean, Harriet Woods was actually the first woman elected to statewide office in Missouri, but Margaret Kelly has the asterisk of being the first because she was appointed. So they often have used that it's been used a lot the last 20 or 30 years when it's rarely happened to promote women who had not served in public office before. In fact, most of the statewide appointments going back to the 80s of the rare vacancy in statewide office has gone to a woman.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that, again, both sides have used it, because it's been Republican as well as Democratic governors who've had to fill these rare statewide vacancies.
I will say, just as kind of an end note on this, because I know there's a couple other Mo 8 things we want to talk about. If someone like, for example, Jolie Justice got this but couldn't run for the special election, that doesn't mean she couldn't use the fact that she was lieutenant governor to run for something else. Like, there's been talk of her running for Congress after Emmanuel Cleaver leaves, or running for the Kansas City City Council. That would position that person well to run for something else other than that office. So it's not like there's no benefit for that to happen. But, I mean, it does kind of limit who the governor can pick in that instance. But it does allow him to appoint a Democrat and kind of sorts out a lot of the confusion. Whether it passes or not, or whether it passes in the current form, remains to be seen. Though.
Right, or if there's a veto override or all that. But it's good fodder for all of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's going to depend. I mean, we don't know how Peter Kinder, Lieutenant Governor Peter Kinder, will end up doing in the whole 8th District crowd.
There's a forum tonight that Joe will be at.
Yeah, there's a forum in Cape Girardeau that I'm planning on being at. And this is the second of 2 forums. I don't know if squirrels being hunted for breakfast will come up, but this will be the last scheduled showcase of the various contenders before Congresswoman Joanne Emerson is slated to leave office in about 3 weeks. There may be more scheduled later, but until she actually steps down, Nixon says he's not going to announce anything as far as an election. The Democrats in that district have been very mum about who they're looking at, whereas the Republicans, it's been very much out there with over a dozen various contenders, including Kinder. Now, one side element that I just found out about and hope to have up later today is that, as we've all mentioned, there's about 80, almost 90 Republican committee people in the 8th District who will vote. Now, but what's interesting is the breakdown. Under the law, any county that has even a little bit in the 8th, their whole party entourage gets to vote. So the result is that actually, what I've been told, according to the State Republican Party, who gave me a breakdown, Jefferson County, for example, has one of the largest contingents that will actually vote, even though only part of Jefferson County is in the 8th. Jefferson County will have a bigger impact on that nomination selection than some counties, including Cape Girardeau.
And Jeffco, although we've talked about it on the show, has been trending more Republican. It's still a traditional Democratic stronghold, so it could be possible that the Republican committeemen have very different lines of thinking than somebody, say, from Ripley County or Cape Girardeau County, which is an extremely Republican county.
And there's a lot of other smaller counties, but the bottom line is that a number of people who will be voting to pick the nominee do not live in the district themselves, just that part of their county is in the district. And this is because of redistricting and how the lines ended up being drawn. And in many cases, county, it wasn't like they tried to keep whole counties within the district. So there's this odd little anomaly. So what Jason says is true. Jefferson County could have a bigger impact on the 8th District than some people think.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading Joe's story tomorrow. The last one, from what I read on Twitter, it seemed to be a hoot. So we'll look for that tomorrow. You can find it on beyondnovember.org or stlbeacon.org. You can find my work on stlpublicradio.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @CSMcDaniel. Joe, will you be live tweeting tonight?
I don't know. It kind of depends. I mean, I may do a little bit, but frankly, I try to focus on actually covering stuff.
I'm sure there'll be plenty of people live tweeting because that's become
that Mo8 hashtag.
That's become kind of the new thing to do.
Well, where can we follow you to?
Well, you can follow me, on the streets. but if you want to follow me on Twitter, it is Jay Rosenbaum.
And I'm Jay Mannies. That's Mannies.
We'll be back next week. Until then, so long.
So long.
So long.
The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer. St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.